What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another session. I am your session leader, Larnell, and finally we have reached the end of our three-part series macronutrient video, where we're going to end with proteins. First, I want to go ahead and start with the science, and before I get into it, just a little bit of a heads up. This is going to be a little bit of a longer one. If I had to, they're all important, don't get me wrong, all the macronutrients, they're very important, very vital, but if I were to rank macronutrients from most important to the least, I'd probably do proteins first, and then maybe carbs and fats, or at the very least proteins, with carbs being about equal, and then fats coming in at a close second, something like that. So I want to go ahead and get started with the science a little bit. Carbons, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like with the carbs and fats, those atoms do still exist, but there's an extra one here. I believe I mentioned it in my carbohydrate video. Nitrogen atoms are added in proteins. Now that'll come into play a little bit later. And mind you, I know there's a lot on this board, so I don't want you to look at the board and then get overwhelmed. I'm gonna break this down point by point, so just try to follow me. So we're gonna start here with the amino acids, right? That's what's next. Proteins, some of you may know, maybe some of y'all don't, but amino acids is the building blocks of proteins. Amino acids is what proteins are made of. And they also have a similar chaining concept. So just like if you watch my carbohydrate video, there was the chaining of the different sugars, the mono, di, and the polysaccharides, single sugars, two sugars, and then there's the many sugars chained together. Same thing here. So with proteins, we have dipeptides, tripeptides, and then polypeptides. So, they do mean the same if you look at the suffixes. Basically, di is 2, tri is 3, and poly is many, right? So there are many different, amino acids chained together. And they also have a similar stomach acid and digestive enzyme concept. So with proteins, right, when you intake protein-rich foods, what happens is, your stomach acid and, your digestive enzymes, they'll, take the peptides and then break them into individual amino acids for transport to the cells to energy, or even to be constructed with more compounds if necessary, if that's required, depending on what's going on with your body at the time. Hemoglobin is a good part of is an important part of proteins, and hemoglobin basically is just your red blood cells. They transport oxygen from your lungs to your body tissues, and it also makes up 80% of your iron. Now here's where things get pretty much into the nitty gritty. You have essential amino acids, and then you have non-essential amino acids. Before I get into these, non-essential amino acids are, amino acids that your body can synthesize on its own. It doesn't need help from food. Well, the essential, it's a little bit different, right? That's the complete opposite. You have to get that from food, right? Your body can't synthesize that on its own. So with that, we have non-essential amino acids followed by 11 non-essential. So here's all the essential. You have histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. Now, if you look at there's 3 of these amino acids that have asterisks by them, right? And the reason for that is because the ones that have asterisks are known as your BCAAs, or branched chain amino acids. Some of y'all who are in the sports nutrition realm, y'all definitely know what that is, or have at least heard of it if you've been working out, or been in the nutrition realm for any length of time. You may have heard of what BCAAs are, especially in sports nutrition, where if you're training sort of in the athletic sense, or you're training more harder than your average person, BCAAs most likely is going to be a thing that you'll need, which basically would just simply help with sports performance, right? Now you have the 11 non-essential amino acids. You have alanine, arginine, asparagine, aspartic acid, cysteine, glutamic acid, glutamine, glycine, proline, serine, and then tyrosine. Now I also forgot to mention in your essential amino acids, they occur in most animal-based proteins, but if you're in the sports nutrition realm, chances are you probably have come across protein powders. Protein powders definitely have them, a lot of them do. The one that I use is the Dimetized ISO 100 brand. I use it typically just after a workout, after I've, did my weightlifting session and my tissues are now torn. My muscle tissues and fibers are torn. I'll use the Dimetized 100 to make sort of a protein smoothie out of it, and I'll just, drink it right after my workout, so that way my body immediately has protein right after to begin the recovery process and do it that much faster. We now move on to the next part of the science of proteins, which is DNA. So when you're at birth, right, a lot of people know this, at birth you're given a genetic sequence, so to speak, right? Your DNA. And what happens is the first part of DNA, or the first part to make a protein, which is the end goal here, that's the end of the arrow, your DNA comes into play to make a protein. The first step is transcription. So basically your genetic code is transcribed to create an mRNA or a messenger RNA, which some of y'all may have heard, out of our most recent pandemic. You might have heard that term, thrown around when it comes to, getting, vaccines and things like that, or, things of that nature. So an mRNA then goes and does its translation process. So the messenger mRNA, it's pretty much in the name. It's, self-explanatory. It's a messenger, so it acts as one. It transports, the genetic sequence or the genetic coding, if you will, to the nuclear membrane, which then, attaches itself to one of the ribosomes. Now, if you don't know what a ribosome is, it's basically a protein-making machine consisting of RNA and protein. Translation occurs, right? That genetic coding is translated after it attaches itself to one of the ribosomes to then go ahead and formulate a protein. I have an example of what happens when you have a normal cell versus, say, somebody with an abnormal cell structure with proteins, with amino acids. This is the sickle cell variant, right? People who have sickle cell anemia, this is the variant here that I learned and came across when I was, in my certificate program. So in a normal cell, here's what an amino acid profile, that's what you call it, right? When you see these chained together, an amino acid profile may look like valine, histidine, leucine, threonine, proline, and then glutamic acid followed by glutamine, right? Now, I have circled, right, the differences between the two, okay? The reason why this is circled is because valine is here, right? So in the sickle cell example, this valine is here, and there should be a glutamic acid, right? So you have basically you have an amino acid in a place where it shouldn't be, and that's the thing with sickle cell anemia. And as many of you may know, sickle cell is not really something that you come across as you get older, or in your lifetime. It's something that you're usually born with, right? It's typically encoded in your DNA. So that's why I wanted to write this example out for you to show what happens, from DNA's transcription all the way to translation to making a protein. Sickle cell anemia is encoded in your DNA. Basically everything here, everything in the normal cell has, up until you get to the valine part. That's what ends up happening with sickle cell anemia. And people who have sickle cell, of course, they got to be careful, because the reason why it's important for amino acid profiles to be, as accurate as possible for you is because, amino acids, and I'm about to get to that here with bodily use, but amino acid profiles, having the right profile can make the difference between whether or not your body is getting oxygen transported to cells, getting energy transported to and from cells, like your lungs, liver, kidneys, all of that comes into play. So that can make the difference in just, how well your bodily function is when, you have an amino acid in a place that doesn't belong. So now we go over to the second side of the board here. We have gene expression, which basically is just the conversion of genetic code into RNA and protein. So I have here as an example, we got insulin, right? Which the pancreas uses, the pancreas secretes insulin, right? The pancreas expresses the gene for insulin. And now we go over to bodily use. So now we're getting into what's a little more fun than just the scientific stuff, at least for me. Proteins, as you can imagine, are necessary for repairing, replacement, and growing of tissue, all right? Also, it replaces lost and damaged cells. So, with our fingernails, hair, muscle cells, right? Our body goes through cells every day. We must shed like hundreds of cells. So in order for those to get replaced, proteins are important. They help with connective tissue and things like that, which is where collagen comes into play. So collagen is a type of protein that actually helps, with connective tissue and constructs bones and teeth. So connective tissue being like, say when you cut yourself, you end up with like a scar, right? Well, that's what that is. Collagen, helps repair the tissues from, when you cut yourself or you get a scrape or something like that. So connective tissue, is good for scars, ligaments, tendons, and then teeth and bones. So the reason why that's important is because, our teeth are made up of, if I remember right, phosphorus, calcium, and fluoride. Everything I just mentioned was minerals, right? Well, collagen plays a part in helping to construct those minerals to essentially make the teeth. Same thing with bones, right? I mentioned calcium. So with teeth and bones, you may have heard this before, but taking vitamin D or getting your daily calcium intake helps maintain strong bones and teeth. Your teeth are literally made up of calcium deposits. Same thing with your bones, right? Your bones, they mineralize with calcium as well. There's calcium in your bones. So, collagen, protein, the protein collagen, I should say, definitely helps with that. That's where that comes into play, right? And then you just continue to get the calcium and the vitamin D that you need to maintain mineralization and, the strength of your teeth and bones, right? Now, proteins also work as enzymes for catabolic and anabolic processes. Catabolic and anabolic, I have an example for each. So I want to touch on those. The catabolic, so whenever you hear catabolic, that's the breakdown. Anabolic is the build up. So your body will enter a catabolic state, if it needs the energy, right? Like if it needs to, break down like your muscle cells for energy or for ketones or what have you, then it's going to do that. All right. That's not really something you want, but like for an example of that is like, say if you fast, right, for like 12 hours. Again, your body does need energy, okay? So now fasting does have its benefits, but I always tell people you want to be careful when you fast because your body needs energy, it's going to pull from something that you might not want it to pull from, or that you definitely don't want it to pull from, okay? Your body will simply break down like your muscle cells and break down like nutrients that are stored to be able to, create energy for, your bodily processes. The anabolic is the complete opposite. That's the buildup. So an example of that is, if you're in the gym, you're weightlifting, right? You're doing a strength training or resistance session. And, after weightlifting, your muscle fibers, they tear. So your body then, with the help of protein, of course, right? That's why, people, you get told, like, if you want to put on more muscle mass or even define and tone, you still want to eat protein, right? For people who put on more muscle mass or that want to, they typically are told to increase their protein intake. Because what happens is, that's the anabolic process. Your body's in the anabolic state where, because your muscle fibers are torn, the protein will help build those muscles back up and make them bigger and stronger. Okay, so now, lastly, they also act as neurotransmitters. They can induce serotonin and create melanin. Now, what happens with protein when you underconsume? Obviously, as you can see, there's a lot on this board. So again, just follow me. I'm going to start with the edema, okay? So edema is essentially the process where, your plasma proteins leak in the cells, right? They leak in between, the space between your cells. And because of that, you end up getting swelling in your tissues, right? Because there's fluid buildup at that point, right? That fluid buildup causes swelling in your tissues, and then you end up with excessive protein loss from inflammation and severe illness. And then you also have inadequate protein synthesis because of it. All right. So, and that can come anyway, even if you don't end up with edema. Under consuming protein means, you obviously don't get the right, synthesis from it. Your body doesn't synthesize the proteins it needs. We can take it back to, the amino acid profile. Well, if you underconsume protein, if you're not getting the amino acids that you need, your body's unable to complete the profile that it needs, for your body to be able to do these things, repairing and replacing and growing tissue, cells, right? Your body's going to be unable to do that effectively, which actually leads me into the next bullet here where it says ineffective transporters of oxygen. That's what can happen when you underconsume the proteins become ineffective transporters because one of the protein's jobs, one of their responsibilities as a macronutrient is to transport oxygen, minerals, and vitamins to and from the cell membranes. So, of course, if you underconsume, you start rendering that process ineffective. It can also inhibit your ability to fight diseases and viral infections. So that actually is an interesting one, and I wrote antibody encoding. So this is what I learned, right? You have, let's say, a virus like the common cold or the flu enters your body. An infection or a virus like that can, you're looking at like 100 different, microbia, if you will, and then they start breaking off into 10,000 different, little viruses to just invade your body as it wishes. Well, what happens is, as your body goes through, that state where, this infection is in there, your immune system, of course, starts kicking in and going to work. But here's where proteins come in. You need proteins to help develop antibodies against whatever it is that enters your system, okay? That way, what happens is that antibody, it'll create antibodies for those antigens that's in your system, and because of it, your body will take that antibody, essentially, and it will, sort of memorize how to create it if that infection or that virus enters your system again, in helping to increase immunity and helping to fight it off faster, if it does enter your body again. So that's why, this is important that you get proteins and that you don't underconsume. You still need those amino acid profiles, right? You need the right sequencing, in a sense, to be able to create the antibodies that you need to fight off diseases and different viral infections. Now you also have what's called nitrogen balances, right? You have nitrogen positive balance and a nitrogen negative balance. Now the nitrogen positive, that's normal. That's not a bad thing. What that basically means is that you have more nitrogen in than you have out, right? Nitrogen intake exceeds nitrogen excretion. And like I said, that's a good thing because here's some examples of why you would be in a nitrogen positive balance. Growing children, right? Pregnant women, recovering from an illness, those are all nitrogen positive balances because a growing child, right? Everyone knows a child doesn't stay a child forever. A child does have to grow. And proteins, of course, play a big part in, helping that child grow. Helping it grow some height, maybe even a little bit of width to them. That's growing children definitely is one thing. Pregnant women is another because now, you're looking at the woman and the, baby that they're carrying, okay? Proteins definitely, play a part in, of course, the genetic sequencing. So you're gonna be in a nitrogen positive balance in that case, all right? Especially if you're getting the protein that you need. If you're under consuming, then you'll be in a nitrogen negative balance, right? And it's the same thing if you're recovering from an illness. You may notice, you have a lot more, the nitrogen will be in more full effect, right, from proteins because it's helping you to get better. Now the nitrogen negative balance, right, severe illness, injury, and of course protein deficiency, which of course is the same as underconsumption. And nitrogen negative balance is basically where you have less nitrogen in, more nitrogen out, right? You have a higher nitrogen excretion than you do intake. Now, here's what can happen if you overconsume proteins. I didn't have space to write this, but, I'll touch on it because I think I've said it before, but anything in excess can convert over to fat, all right? So with that said, all right, you want to be careful of overconsuming proteins anyway, because besides them just converting over to fat and then storing in your body as such, you could be noticing these effects. Deamination is one of them. Now, deamination is basically where your body breaks down proteins, right? It breaks down like your muscle cells. And so you definitely don't really want that. Then you got urea waste effects. So urea is basically, that's where your liver and kidneys come into play because your kidneys processes protein. Urea is basically protein byproduct. It's like excess protein. So something else that can happen, and this is normal, right? Besides excess protein converting over to fat, what your body typically would do with excess protein is after everything has been, all the bodily functions has been, fulfilled and whatnot, any excess protein is then sent over to your kidneys for processing. So your liver will, take and it'll combine carbon dioxide with ammonia to turn that excess protein into urea. Then that urea will then go to your kidneys for processing to be, excreted in your urine. I say here with overconsumption, specifically for people who are like dieting and they're on a high protein diet, you want to be mindful, okay? Because there's an importance of water intake here, right? Now, your body does need fluid in order to help process the urea, the excess protein. So when you're not drinking enough water, what can happen is your body, this is specifically if you're taking a high protein diet, right? If you're on a high protein diet, the higher the protein, the increase of urea you're gonna have. And again, to process the urea, you need water. But if you're not drinking water, if you're not drinking enough, okay, your body will use its own water to help process that urea. And the reason why you don't want that is because, like, say if you're trying to, lose weight, like you're trying to lose body fat specifically, right? You'll notice that if your body uses its own water, then you'll lose water weight, but you're not going to lose body fat. So that's why you want to be careful with, dieting and you're taking high protein. And that just about covers the protein video. So recap, starting with protein, right? We went over how protein has multiple responsibilities. So I believe I mentioned that in the carbs video when it came to conversion of energy and glucose and things like that, and how your body, uses glucose for energy, which it gets from carbs. And you don't really want the proteins because it already has, enough responsibilities. If your body doesn't have the energy from glucose, your body could call upon proteins and start breaking down the proteins and the amino acids, to make a new glucose and to get, the energy that your body needs. So you don't really want that. It already has its own responsibilities. And I've listed some, just as a reminder. Transport, right? So oxygen to and from the lungs to, the cell membrane. Of course, DNA processes, we went over that. Enzymes, hormones, antibody creation for, when you get a disease or you get some sort of viral infection, right? Your body uses proteins to help with creating an antibody. Then you got tissues and cell structure and supply. So we went over that too. Protein deficiency will stall bodily activity due to insufficient amino acid profiles. So of course, we did go over that in the underconsumption. It needs the right profile. So you getting, like I said, the 11 non-essential amino acids, your body can do that by itself. It doesn't need help. It's the non-essential amino acids. That's where you gotta make sure you're eating the right type of food, right? You're getting food from the right sources. And of course, we went over this one. We didn't talk about what can happen with your kidneys if you overconsume. But overconsuming, I did mention that the kidneys helps break down protein. So, your kidneys, as they're breaking down proteins, if you're overconsuming, right? If you're on a high protein diet, you're just consuming protein. This could elevate your kidney function, which is typically seen in blood work. You can see the urea, you see, I believe creatinine is another part of it, and of course kidneys, right? You see all of that in your blood work. So when you go get fasting labs, a doctor can easily tell if, you're eating too much protein, or even if you're not drinking enough water. They can see that stuff, the urea that you produce and at what rate. They can see all that in your blood work. But that's what can happen when you overconsume proteins, right? Your kidneys aid in breakdown. And if your kidney function continues to get elevated, eventually your kidneys are going to be like, I'm kind of worn out. I'm on my last leg. And then, then you might, if things get real bad, you could be looking at a transplant. If things get like bad enough. You have to overconsume like constantly in order for that to happen, but it is a possibility. I should say it's a possibility. Then choose quality proteins. Okay, so here's some of the different sources that you can get proteins from. We have legumes, which are basically beans, right? So black beans, pinto beans. You got edamame, you have lentils. Those are all legumes. Okay, different types of beans. You also have lean meats, right? Quality proteins you can get from lean meat. So lean ground beef. Remember I mentioned in, I believe it was the fats video. 96.4 is the leanest type of meat you'll get. 93.7 is, the next like step down. It's still lean. It's just the next step down. It's not the leanest, right? It's not as lean as 96.4. 96.4 I believe is like extra lean. 93.7 is lean. Then you have 85.15, 75.25. The lower you go, the less lean you're looking at, right? The more saturated and trans fats you're gonna be getting out of the lower, ratio of beef. Soy, like tempeh, tofu, and I know a lot of people don't really like tofu. It depends on how you make it. It depends on how you cook it, how you season it. It's just like with anything else. You can make tofu taste good. You just have to know like how to cook it, right? You gotta know what your favorite seasonings. You can use your favorite seasonings. You can use some sauces, teriyaki, soy, barbecue even. If you use the right things, you can make tofu taste good. People just hear tofu and they just think it. You know what I'm saying? It's okay though. Not everybody likes tofu though. But I'd say definitely don't knock it till you try it. So choose quality proteins as amino acid composition and profile depends on this. And it also depends on digestibility of certain proteins as well. So with that, I went ahead and wrote down the 3 different sources that you can get proteins from and what their digestibility percentage is. So with plant proteins, and this is gonna lead me into this one where I'm gonna address my vegan dieters here in a second, but the plant proteins are about anywhere from 70 to 90% digestible. Soy and legumes, well over 90%, so you're good there. Like if you're the type that doesn't like to eat meat, you don't like eating animal-based foods, right? You're vegan or vegetarian, you definitely can get away with soy and legumes, as a way to get the protein in that you need. And then of course animal protein, most of us know that that's probably the best source of protein that you can get. It's digestible up to 99%. So now, plant-based dieters, my vegans out there, and maybe even somewhat vegetarians, because they still do, from what I understand, vegetarians, they can still eat eggs, they can still eat some seafood too. But vegans, I know y'all are the ones that don't. For any of my vegans out there listening, I know you guys don't typically eat any types of meats at all. Like y'all don't eat dairy, y'all don't eat anything animal-based. So that's fine, but I want to throw a warning out to you. I want to, throw a little beware, right? You want to make sure to eat complementary proteins so that your body can still create the essential amino acids that it needs to, make up a profile. So you see what happens is, right, most vegan dieters tend to eat plant proteins, which is fine, but sometimes, depending on the plant protein, they're not all like this, but depending on the plant protein, you may be getting what's called incomplete proteins. And if you're eating incomplete proteins often and continuously, then your profile, is also not going to be complete. It won't be of the quality that your body needs it to be. You could end up missing out on an essential amino acid in your profile somewhere. That's I guess a negative towards eating just plant proteins. It's recommended that you want to eat complementary proteins, because what it does is it still gives you enough to be able to get the essential amino acid that your body does need, and create that profile completed, and be able to do its bodily activities. So that's what I tell my plant-based dieters. For you guys, definitely, a lot of you already know if you're a vegan dieter, but, for those of you that maybe don't, or you're looking to get into veganism, or, maybe get away from meats a little bit and just eat more, plant-based, that's fine. You just want to make sure you remember, okay, plant proteins, if you're not careful, you may not get the whole, the essential proteins, or the essential amino acid, I should say, that your body does need and to create its profile. So definitely eat more soy, legumes, right? Like I said, tofu, tempeh, veggie burgers. Veggie burgers are good, There's a brand called Beyond. They make some decent burgers, right? And their burgers are filled with beet juice extract, if I'm not mistaken. So I had somebody ask me once, like, they saw blood coming out of a plant-based burger, the Beyond brand. And I had to explain to them, okay, it's not what you think. It's not actual blood. It's beet juice. Now, for any of y'all that eat beets, beets are good for you. Beet juice, the extract from beets, is what comprises a Beyond plant-based burger, among other things, right? You got soy, you got other plants, right? There's Morningstar. Morningstar is a great brand. I eat those a lot. I have the Morningstar veggie sausage patties, so that's an option for you if you decide you want to go vegan. Morningstar Veggie Crumbles, and then there's Morningstar Garden Veggie Burgers, which I just recently started buying, and they taste good, at least to me. You know, they taste really good. So there are some options out there for you if you're looking at, you know, following up on veganism, or maybe you just want to, you know, alternate or like maybe replace certain meats so that you're not eating as much meat and animal-based things. There's options out there for you. You know, it's just a matter of knowing what to choose, like a matter of, you know, understanding, like, you know, the right types of foods to fuel you, you know, and so that you still complete your amino acid profile and that you can still do your, you know, your duties. Your body, what that is, can still do its duties. Now, of course, stay away from processed meats, right? I mentioned that, I believe, in the carbs video, but you definitely want to stay away from processed meats, because processed meats, while you get the protein, processed meats are labeled a carcinogen by the WHO, by the World Health Organization. Basically, a carcinogen, it's a cancer-causing substance. Carcinogens is also in cigarettes, okay? Now, I'm not saying this to try to deter anybody away from, you know, going to their favorite fast food restaurant and getting a burger, or, you know, trying to sway people away from smoking. I mean, if I could, I would, but, you know, I don't want to tell you what to do. I'm just putting the info out there for you, you know, and providing you the insight that maybe you don't have, or if you've been provided it before, maybe just reminding you that, hey, you know, these are labeled carcinogens, right? Processed meats are literally on the same level as cigarettes, as smoking cigarettes. So processed meats is basically anything that's been smoked, cured, and of course injected with any type of preservative or chemicals, you know, anything artificial, right? That's what you want to stay away from. The last bit of info I have here, so this one's to all my athletes. You definitely want to be aware of, because, you know, we all like it, right? We all prefer, you know, to take protein powders to help us get the extra proteins that we need. I typically try to get people to get their proteins from food, but if you decide, if you're like me and you just drink you know, a protein powder in the mix of a smoothie, or just shaking up with water, or maybe even a little bit of milk. You know, I don't use milk, I use water anyway. But I started, you know, doing smoothies with my protein powders. So I'll do, you know, the protein powder, some water, and then some frozen fruit. And then I'll just blend it up, make it into a smoothie, and then throw it in my stainless steel cup. You know, that way I can get the extra protein that, you know, I need if I'm especially putting on muscle mass. For my athletes out there, I know we all love protein powders because you get the BCAAs, right? The branched chain amino acids that you may have a tough time getting from food. It helps with, you know, sports performance and increases recovery. You know, we all love it, right? We get things that, you know, we may have a hard time getting, but you want to be careful about high intake of those, you know, said powders, because they can cause diarrhea, and or, you know, it could cause an essential amino acid being left out of an amino acid group to complete your profile. You don't want that either, okay? You definitely don't want that. As I mentioned with the sickle cell group, or the sickle cell example, I should say, that amino acid group, you know, there's an amino acid there where, you know, it shouldn't be. And when you have something like that, it can affect the amino acid's ability to transport oxygen and all these other responsibilities. Basically, if you look back up here, if you can see it, all these other responsibilities, you know, having an improper profile of amino acids can affect the protein's ability and your body's ability to be able to do all these things. Getting an amino acid profile as complete of one as possible, that's essential. All right, balance, everyone. So that's basically it. I spoke about, you know, the 80-20 rule that circulates in the fitness industry in my last video. About 80% whole foods, grains, veggies, fruits, lean meats, you know, stuff like that, okay? And then 20%, you know, saturated fats or trans fats, things that are higher in sodium, right? Like that's the 80-20 rule, okay? You want to try to limit as much saturated and trans fats as humanly possible. Items that are high in sodium, items that are high in sugars, like specifically refined sugars and added sugars. That's what you want to try to, you know, limit as much as possible. But, you know, it's all about balance, okay? Everything in moderation, which is a tried and true statement. It's a tried and true phrase, okay? You hear it all the time, moderation, moderation. But that concludes our protein macronutrient video. This is the last video in this 3-part series. And I'm excited. I'm very excited because now I can start getting down into things that, I learned that I know will be helpful to you. My next video, I promised it would be after the intro video I made, but my next video is going to be about kcalories and AMDRs, which stands for acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. I had to go through all of these macronutrients first before I went through that video. This 3-part series had to serve as sort of a prerequisite or precursor, if you will, to the kcalorie video that I'm gonna speak about. But you're not gonna wanna miss that one. It's gonna be an interesting talk we'll have. So, thank you for tuning in, as always, all right? Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, right? Any questions, comments, concerns, in my comment section. I definitely check them periodically. But thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Hope I didn't bore you too much and that I, brought y'all some insight that was of value to you. But thanks again, and I'll see y'all on the next one.